The day Tansi was fired, the sky over Edmonton did not do anything dramatic. There were no storm clouds, no cold wind sweeping down from the north. It was just an ordinary Tuesday in late October, the kind of day where the light comes in flat and grey and the trees stand stripped bare without making any fuss about it. Tansi walked out of the Mapleview Hotel through the side exit, the staff entrance, the one that faced the loading dock and the dumpsters. And she stood there for a moment, holding the small cardboard box that contained everything she owned in that building. A pair of indoor shoes, a phone charger, a framed photograph of her son Eli, and a tiny cactus she had kept on the windowsill of the break room for 2 years. She did not cry. She told herself she would not cry until she got home. It had not been her dream job. She had known that from the first day. But it had been a job. And in the 4 years she had worked housekeeping at the Mapleview, she had learned that a reliable paycheck was not something you treated carelessly, not when you were a single mother with a 7-year-old and a landlord who did not accept excuses. She had been one of the best workers on her floor. Mr. Hennessy, the housekeeping supervisor, had told her so himself twice at the annual reviews. She was thorough, she was quiet. She never left a room that was not exactly as it should be, and still, here she was, standing by the dumpsters with a cactus. It had started 3 days earlier, on a Saturday afternoon. Tansi had been turning down the beds in room 812 when she heard a sound from the hallway, a dull, heavy thud, the kind that does not belong to footsteps or luggage wheels. She stepped out and found a man collapsed against the wall near the elevator. He was a large man, older, dressed in a plain grey sweater and dark trousers, the kind of clothes that told you nothing about who he was. He was conscious but barely, his breathing shallow and his face the color of old ash. Tansi did not think. She set down her cart, knelt beside him, and spoke to him in a calm, even voice. She had done a first aid course 3 years ago. The hotel had required it, and she remembered enough to know that his breathing needed to stay clear, and that she should not move him until she understood what was wrong. She loosened the collar of his sweater, checked his pulse, spoke to him steadily, while she called for help from the house phone at the end of the corridor. By the time the paramedics arrived, the man was more alert. He had gripped her hand at one point and said something she did not fully catch. Thank you, or perhaps just her name, though she could not imagine how he knew it. She stayed with him until the stretcher came. Then she went back to finish her rooms, because she had 6 more to do before the end of her shift. She did not tell anyone what had happened. She thought that was the end of it. But on Monday morning, she was called into the office of Miss Arnett, the floor manager, a woman with a tight professional smile and the habit of pausing before she spoke, as though she was deciding how much of the truth to release at a time. "We've had a complaint," Miss Arnett said. The complaint had come from a guest on the 8th floor. The guest, Tansi was not told who, had seen a housekeeper crouching over a man in the hallway and had described it, in a written message to hotel management, as unprofessional and alarming. The guest had written that it looked like the housekeeper was interfering with a guest and that it had made him deeply uncomfortable. Tansi explained what had actually happened. She explained it calmly, clearly, with every detail in order. Mrs. Arnett listened with that pausing stillness of hers, and then said that she understood, that of course it sounded like Tansi had meant well, but that there were protocols for this kind of situation. Housekeeping staff were not first responders. They were not supposed to make direct physical contact with guests under any circumstances. There had been a training module on this. Did Tansi remember the training module? Tansi remembered the training module. It had said to call the front desk. She had also called the front desk from the house phone while she was already with the man. She said this. Ms. Arnett paused. "The problem," she said, "is the complaint on file." By Wednesday, Tansi had been let go. The official reason listed on the termination paperwork was conduct inconsistent with guest experience standards. She was given 2 weeks of severance and a reminder about returning her key card. She walked home from the Mapleview that Tuesday evening because the bus would have cost her $3.50 and she needed to think. And thinking was easier when her feet were moving. Edmonton in late October was cold but not yet brutal. The kind of cold that makes you aware of your own face. She walked for 40 minutes and thought about Eli, and about the rent, and about the fact that she had $38 in her checking account, and that the next paycheck she had been counting on was now not coming. Her neighbor, Mama Cleo, was sitting on the front steps of the building when Tansi arrived. Mama Cleo was 71 years old and had lived in that building for 22 years and knew everything that happened in it and half of what happened on the street. She took one look at Tansi and the cardboard box and said nothing, which was itself a form of kindness. "Come eat," Mama Cleo said. Tansi ate jollof rice at Mama Cleo's kitchen table while Eli did his homework on the floor nearby, using Mama Cleo's encyclopedias as a hard surface to write on because he liked the pictures of animals in them. Mama Cleo refilled her bowl without asking. Tansi told her what had happened, and Mama Cleo listened without making the sounds of sympathy that sometimes make a person feel worse, not better. "You did right," Mama Cleo said when Tansi finished. "You know you did right. Knowing that doesn't pay for Eli's winter coat," Tansi said. Mama Cleo considered this. "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." That night, after Eli was asleep, Tansi sat at the small desk in the corner of their apartment and opened her laptop and began looking for work. She had her high school diploma, her first aid certification, 4 years of experience in hospitality, and a reference from Mr. Hennessy, who had been genuinely sorry about what happened and had said so in a handwritten note tucked into the termination envelope, which, Tance thought, said a great deal about Mr. Hennessy and very little about the hotel. She applied for 10 jobs that night: cleaning contracts, front desk positions at smaller hotels, a part-time role at a dry cleaner's on 109th. She applied carefully and without rushing, writing each cover letter properly, not the kind that could have been written by anyone for anything. Over the next 3 weeks, she heard back from 2 of them. One told her the position had been filled internally. The other scheduled an interview, which went well enough that Tansi drove home feeling something close to hope, and then sent her an email 5 days later, saying they had decided to go in a different direction. She picked up a few shifts through a temp agency, cleaning commercial offices on evenings and weekends, and made enough to cover the rent for November, but not enough to cover December, and also groceries, and also Eli's school field trip, and also the small mountain of other things that life requires of a person who is trying to stay afloat. She did not tell Eli anything was wrong. She was very good at this. She made his lunches and signed his permission slips and sat with him in the evening while he told her about his day, and she listened with her whole self, the way she always did, because Eli's day was genuinely interesting to her and always had been. He was a curious child, the kind who noticed things and asked questions that required real answers. He had asked her once why winter came, and she had explained axial tilt to him, which had taken 20 minutes and had ended with him drawing a diagram on the back of a grocery receipt. The hard part was the mornings, after Eli left for school, when the apartment was quiet, and the weight of everything settled back down on Tansi's shoulders like something physical. She would sit with her coffee going cold and look at her phone and wonder how long she could keep the surface smooth before something cracked underneath. It was on one of those mornings, a Thursday in late November, that she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She had been getting calls from a debt collection agency about a medical bill from 2 years ago, and she had started letting unknown numbers go to voicemail out of sheer self-preservation. But something made her pick up that Thursday. She could not explain it afterward. "Is this Tansi Okoro?" said the voice on the other end. It was a man's voice, measured and careful, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who chose his words before he released them. She said it was. "My name is Callum Voss," the man said. "I believe you may have helped me some weeks ago, at the Mapleview Hotel." Tansi went very still. "I understand," Mr. Voss continued, "that you lost your position because of what you did that day. I would like to speak with you if you're willing." She did not know what to say. She said yes. They met 2 days later at a coffee shop on Jasper Avenue, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and staff who wrote your name on your cup in careful handwriting. Tansi arrived early and chose a table near the window and sat with her hands folded in her lap and told herself to be calm, that she had no reason to expect anything from this meeting, that she should treat it as information only. Callum Voss arrived exactly on time. He was the man from the hallway, but in full health, he was different. Taller, more present, with a quietness about him that was not the same as the stillness of the unconscious. He was perhaps 65, with a face that had spent a good deal of time in both difficult rooms and open air, the combination of which gave it an interesting texture. He was dressed, again, with almost deliberate plainness, and if you had seen him on the street, you would not have looked twice. He sat down, thanked her for coming, and ordered a black coffee. He did not open with pleasantries or build toward the point. He said, simply, that he had been traveling through Edmonton on private business when he had felt unwell in the lift and made it as far as the hallway before his legs went out from under him. He had a heart condition that was managed but occasionally made its presence known. The paramedics had told him later that the way he had been positioned when help arrived, upright and with his airway clear, had made a real difference. "You kept talking to me," he said. "That mattered. I don't know if anyone told you that." Tansi said no one had told her that. He nodded slowly. "I looked into what happened afterward," he said. "I spoke with the hotel. I made my feelings on the matter known, though I understand the decision had already been made." Tansi said that she did not hold it against the hotel, which was partly true, and partly the kind of thing you say when you are sitting across from someone who clearly has some connection to the hotel you were fired from. He smiled a little at that. "That's generous," he said. He asked her about herself. Not in the probing way of a job interview, more the way of someone who is genuinely assembling a picture. She told him about her background, her work history, about coming to Edmonton from Calgary 8 years ago, about Eli. She did not intend to mention Eli, but he came out naturally, the way he always did, because he was the organizing fact of her life. Mr. Voss listened the way that very few people actually listen, without preparing his response while she was still speaking, without nodding at the moments where nodding was expected rather than felt. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I run a property development company. We have several projects across Western Canada, including 2 hotels we manage directly. I don't usually involve myself in the day-to-day of the hospitality side, but I know the people who do, and I know what it looks like when someone understands how to treat a human being with dignity." Tansi kept her face still. "I'm not in the habit of offering charity," he continued. "I want to be clear about that. What I'm proposing is work, a real position, with a real salary and real expectations. But I would like to offer you an opportunity if you want one." She asked him what the position was. He explained that one of his hotels, the Whitmore, a mid-sized property in Calgary, was in the process of restructuring its guest relations department. The previous director had left, and the interim person managing it was competent, but not permanent. He was looking for someone to start in a junior coordinator role, with a clear path toward more responsibility, contingent on performance and a short training period. The salary was more than twice what she had been making at the Mapleview. Tansi sat with that for a moment. She said, "Mr. Voss, I was in housekeeping. I don't have experience in guest relations management." "You have 4 years of experience watching how guests are treated," he said, "and apparently the judgment to act when the situation requires it, and the self-possession not to panic. That's not nothing. The rest is trainable." She said she would need to think about it. He said that was the correct answer, and that she should take the time she needed, and he slid a card across the table. She thought about it for 36 hours. She called her sister in Vancouver, who said, predictably, that she should do it, and also that she should have called more often. She talked to Mama Cleo, who listened to the whole story and then said, "The man whose life you saved is offering you a job. What exactly is there to think about?" Tansi said there was the matter of Calgary, of relocating, of Eli's school, of whether this was real and not some arrangement she would regret. Mama Cleo said, "You've been regretting the safe choice for 3 months. Try the other one." That night, after Eli was asleep, Tansi sat at the same small desk where she had been sending out applications into the silence, and she wrote an email to Callum Voss. She said yes. She said she had conditions. She needed a month before the start date to arrange the move. She needed confirmation that the role and the salary were what he had described. and she needed to understand that she was coming as herself, not as a gesture of gratitude on anyone's part. He replied in 11 minutes. He said, "Those terms are fair. I expected nothing less." The month that followed was one of the more difficult and more alive months of Tansi's life. She gave notice on the Edmonton apartment, which the landlord accepted with a professionalism that she thought probably masked relief. Since she had been late on rent twice in the past 3 months, she packed what mattered, which turned out to be less than she thought, and donated what didn't. She told Eli they were moving to Calgary, and he received this information with the focused gravity of a 7-year-old processing a large change, and then asked whether Calgary had good libraries. And she said yes, some of the best, and he accepted this. Mama Cleo stood in the hallway. The morning Tansi loaded the last boxes into the borrowed van, and did not say anything sentimental, which Tansi was grateful for, because she was keeping a great deal together with very little to spare that morning. Mama Cleo hugged her once, hard, and pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand that turned out later to be her jollof rice recipe, written in the careful handwriting of someone who has never written it down before. The Whitmore was a different world from the Mapleview, not in scale. It was actually smaller, but in the quality of attention that had been paid to it. It was the kind of hotel where things worked because someone had thought carefully about whether they should work, rather than because a procedure mandated it. Tansi started on a Monday in a corner office that was really more of a large alcove, with a desk that looked out onto a small courtyard where the groundskeeper spent his mornings doing things that appeared productive without urgency. Her supervisor in the initial weeks was a woman named Mrs. Akin, the general manager of the property, who had the particular gift of making high standards feel like natural ones rather than imposed ones. She did not praise Tansi often, but when she did it was specific and therefore meaningful. In her 3rd week, after Tansi had redesigned the feedback process for departing guests and increased the response rate from 11% to 40%, Mrs. Aiken stopped by her alcove and said, "You understand people. Don't stop doing that." Tansi did not stop. She found Calgary livable in ways Edmonton had not been. Though she said this to no one, because she suspected it was partly just the change itself, the strange renewal that comes from being somewhere new, where no street has a story attached to it yet. Eli settled into his new school with a speed that surprised her, and then did not surprise her, because he was Eli. He found the library in the 1st week, and came home with 6 books about deep-sea creatures and read all 6 inside of 10 days. She called Mama Cleo every Sunday. Mama Cleo's updates were always the same in format and different in content. What had happened in the building, what the weather was doing, what she had made for dinner, whether the man in 4B had finally dealt with the situation involving his bicycle. These calls were among the most stabilizing things in Tansi's week. Callum Voss was not a presence in the hotel's daily life. He appeared occasionally, without announcement, and walked through the building the way someone walks through a place they have thought about a great deal without needing to demonstrate it. He had a brief conversation with Tansi in the lobby one afternoon, 3 months into her role, and asked how she was finding things. She told him honestly, harder than she expected in some ways, more interesting than she expected in others. He said that sounded about right. Then he asked about Eli, and she said Eli was well and had recently become very interested in bioluminescence. And Callum Voss laughed at that, a real laugh, not a polite one, and said to give the boy his regards. By spring, Mrs. Aiken had expanded Tansi's responsibilities to include coordinating the retraining of the front desk team, a project that required more patience than she had known. She possessed and produced, at the end of 3 months, a staff that was measurably better and also slightly less suspicious of her, which she counted as a success. In June, she was offered the position of guest relations director on a full contract. The salary made her sit down when she read the number. Not because it was excessive, it was fair, but because it was the kind of number that meant something had genuinely changed, that this was not a temporary arrangement or a trial period or a kindness that could be withdrawn. She was being asked to build something and trusted to do it. She called her sister before she called anyone else, which was the right order. On the afternoon that she signed the contract, Callum Voss was in the hotel and stopped by her office, properly an office now, with a door and a window, and asked if she had a moment. He sat across from her and said that he had a habit of not making speeches, but that he wanted her to know something. "When I was in that hallway," he said, "and I could hear your voice before I could see anything clearly. You sounded like someone who had decided the situation was manageable, not someone performing calm, someone who had actually decided." He paused in his way. "I have needed to find people who do that my whole career. They're not common." Tansi thanked him. Then she said, "I need you to know something too." He waited. "You gave me a chance that had nothing to do with charity," she said. "I know that now, but I want you to know that I came here intending to earn it regardless. I wasn't going to let it be anything other than that." He nodded. "I know," he said. "That's why it worked." After he left, Tansi sat at her desk for a few minutes longer than she needed to. Outside the window, the groundskeeper was doing his unhurried work in the courtyard, and the afternoon light was the particular kind that comes in late June in Alberta, long and warm and without any urgency, and it fell across her desk and across the signed contract and across the framed photograph of Eli that she had moved from a cardboard box to a windowsill in a break room to a small desk in an alcove and now here, to a window that faced a courtyard, in a city she had chosen, in a life she had not planned but had built, piece by piece, from everything she refused to let go of.